The cruelest choices are not the ones that break your heart. They are the ones that teach you how little your heart was ever valued. The silver bells of Blackwood Palace echoed across the valley as thousands of wolves gathered beneath banners that shimmered in the crisp autumn breeze. Every hopeful face turned toward the ancient marble platform where destiny would soon choose the next Luna. Evelyn Carter stood quietly near the front of the royal court, her ivory gown catching the soft morning light, while whispers drifted through the crowd like leaves carried on the wind. Everyone believed the same story. Everyone expected the same ending. For years she had stood beside Alpha King Rowan Blackwood through harsh winters, difficult treaties, endless ceremonies, and silent sacrifices no one else had ever noticed. She had never asked for recognition. She had never demanded promises. She had simply believed that loyalty, kindness, and patience would someday be enough. The elders certainly thought so. The noble families certainly thought so. Even the servants exchanged knowing smiles whenever they passed her in the palace halls. The future Luna, they quietly called her whenever she could no longer hear. But destiny had a way of arriving dressed as certainty before revealing itself as something entirely different. Rowan stepped onto the platform wearing a black ceremonial coat embroidered with silver wolves, his expression calm, unreadable, almost distant. The entire kingdom fell silent. Even the breeze seemed to pause among the towering pines surrounding the royal courtyard. Evelyn lifted her eyes to meet his for only a brief second. Once, those silver eyes had always found her first in every crowded room. Today they drifted past her as though she were simply another guest. Elder Magnus raised the ancient moonstone crown with careful hands, its polished surface reflecting the morning sky. Before the moon goddess and every pack of the northern territories, the elder declared, "Our Alpha King will name the woman who shall stand beside him." 100 heartbeats seemed to pass in perfect silence. Evelyn felt no fear. She felt only an unfamiliar stillness settling. Inside her chest, Rowan took one measured step forward, then another. Finally, he extended his hand, not toward Evelyn, but toward Victoria Ashcroft, whose triumphant smile spread slowly across her face as gasps rippled through the gathering. For one endless moment, nobody moved. The silence itself seemed unable to understand what had happened. Victoria accepted the moonstone crown with graceful confidence while nobles hurried to applaud, their hesitation melting into celebration. Cheers rolled through the courtyard like distant thunder, yet Evelyn heard almost none of it. The world had become strangely quiet. She lowered her gaze, not because she was ashamed, but because there was nothing left worth searching for in Rowan's eyes. She offered a small, almost invisible smile that surprised even herself. There would be no desperate plea, no tears before strangers, no angry accusation. Some endings deserved silence more than words. As musicians filled the palace with triumphant melodies and guests surrounded their new Luna with congratulations, Evelyn walked away unnoticed through the marble corridors she had crossed 1,000 times before. By sunset, her chambers stood empty. Her dresses remained neatly folded. Her jewelry rested untouched inside carved wooden boxes. Only one window stood open, allowing the cool mountain air to carry away the last trace of the woman everyone assumed would always remain. Before dawn broke over Blackwood Kingdom, Evelyn Carter had vanished without leaving behind a single letter, a single explanation, or a single promise to return. Years later, historians would remember the day Rowan chose another woman as the beginning of Victoria's reign. They would not realize it was also the first day an empire quietly began to rise beyond the northern mountains. 5 years slipped away like snow melting into a river, quiet enough for the world to believe nothing had changed, yet long enough for everything to become unrecognizable. Blackwood Kingdom remained powerful on the surface, its towers standing tall against the northern sky, its soldiers marching with flawless discipline, and its royal banners still flying above the palace walls. Queen Victoria carried herself with flawless elegance during every ceremony, wearing jewels collected from every allied pack, smiling for every ambassador who crossed the palace gates. To outsiders, the kingdom appeared stronger than ever. But beneath the polished marble floors and carefully rehearsed celebrations, something invisible had begun to fade. Rowan Blackwood noticed it first in the smallest moments. The palace gardens no longer bloomed with the same quiet harmony. The orphan wolf pups, who once laughed freely in the courtyards, had grown strangely silent. The healers complained that volunteers rarely appeared anymore. Even the palace staff changed more frequently than before, each departure explained by ordinary reasons that somehow never sounded convincing. Every room still looked exactly as it had years ago, yet the warmth that once softened the cold stone halls had disappeared so gradually that no one could say when it had left. Rowan never spoke Evelyn's name. Neither did anyone else. It became one of those unspoken memories that everyone carried, but no one dared uncover. Then the rumors began. They arrived with traveling merchants from beyond the Frostvale Mountains. At first, they sounded like exaggerated campfire tales told to entertain exhausted travelers after long days on frozen roads. They spoke of a mysterious city that had risen where abandoned villages once stood. A place where no hungry child was turned away, where widows received work instead of pity, where healers treated strangers without asking what pack they belonged to. Some insisted its markets offered goods impossible to find anywhere else across the Northern Territories. Others claimed its schools welcomed every child regardless of rank, bloodline, or family name. The city had no official map, yet every caravan somehow managed to find its gates. The merchants called it Dawnhaven because the white stone buildings reflected the sunrise until the entire valley seemed filled with golden light. Rowan dismissed the stories as hopeful exaggerations born from difficult winters. Kingdoms were not built from kindness alone. Yet month after month, the reports multiplied instead of fading away. Trade routes quietly shifted northward. Independent craftsmen left prosperous towns to seek opportunity beyond the mountains. Farmers whispered that Dawnhaven paid fair prices even during poor harvests. Physicians returned carrying unfamiliar medicines that healed lingering illnesses faster than expected. Then came the report that finally held Rowan's attention. His chief advisor placed a weathered ledger across the council table. Several neighboring packs had signed commercial agreements not with another alpha, but with a woman whose name remained carefully hidden behind a simple title. Lady of Dawnhaven. No family crest. No noble lineage. No known mate. Only a silver phoenix stamped beneath every official document. Rowan traced the unfamiliar emblem with thoughtful fingers while an unexpected feeling settled quietly in his chest. It was neither fear nor jealousy. It was recognition without understanding, as though a forgotten melody had drifted through an open window after many years. Somewhere beyond the northern mountains, someone had quietly changed the future while the rest of the world remained busy celebrating the past. The road beyond the Frostvale Mountains had nearly claimed Evelyn Carter before hope ever found her again. For 3 days she wandered through endless forests where towering pines blocked the pale winter sun and icy streams carved silent paths through untouched valleys. She carried almost nothing except a weathered cloak, a small leather satchel, and the quiet determination that she would never return to a place where her worth had depended upon someone else's decision. Hunger became familiar. Exhaustion settled into her bones. Yet every morning she continued walking because each step carried her farther from the woman she had once been. On the 4th evening, as snowflakes drifted gently across the mountain pass, an elderly woman wrapped in a simple gray cloak appeared beside the trail as though she had stepped out of the forest itself. Her silver hair shimmered beneath the fading light, and her calm blue eyes studied Evelyn with unusual warmth instead of curiosity. "You have been walking like someone searching for a home," the woman said softly. Evelyn lowered her gaze. "No," she answered after a long silence. "I have been walking like someone learning how to live without one." The woman smiled with quiet understanding. Sometimes those become the same journey. Her name was Eleanor Ashbourne, the respected matriarch of an isolated settlement hidden beyond the mountains where families from forgotten packs had slowly built peaceful lives together. They were healers, craftsmen, teachers, and farmers who believed that character mattered more than rank. No alpha ruled their valley. No noble bloodline decided another person's future. Everyone contributed according to their gifts, and everyone shared equally during difficult seasons. At first, Evelyn intended to remain only long enough to regain her strength. She worked in the village bakery before sunrise, helped children learn their letters in the afternoons, and assisted elderly healers during the evenings. Days became weeks. Weeks quietly became months. Wherever she noticed a problem, She searched patiently for a solution instead of waiting for someone else to act. She organized food storage before winter storms arrived. She persuaded neighboring settlements to exchange supplies instead of competing against one another. She encouraged skilled workers to teach apprentices freely so knowledge would never disappear with age. The little valley slowly transformed. Prosperity did not arrive through miracles. It arrived because one woman refused to believe kindness was weakness. Eleanor watched every change with quiet pride. One evening, she invited Evelyn to the highest hill overlooking the growing settlement, where hundreds of warm lanterns flickered beneath the darkening sky. "Do you know what I see when I look at this place?" Eleanor asked. Evelyn smiled gently. "A village becoming stronger." The older woman slowly shook her head. "I see a leader who still believes she is only surviving." Evelyn remained silent as the cool mountain breeze brushed against her face. She had never imagined herself wearing a crown or commanding armies. She only wanted to build a place where no young woman would ever feel abandoned because someone powerful had chosen another path. Eleanor rested a reassuring hand upon her shoulder. "One kingdom measured your value by whether a king selected you," she said. "Build one that measures every soul by the good they leave behind." As dawn broke across the mountains the following morning, Evelyn stood overlooking the valley with new purpose shining quietly behind her thoughtful eyes. She no longer dreamed of returning to Blackwood Palace. She had begun imagining something far greater than revenge. She had begun imagining a future. The valley changed so gradually that those who lived there almost forgot what hardship had once looked like. New homes rose beside clear rivers where abandoned fields had once stretched beneath lonely skies. Children filled the streets with laughter instead of uncertainty, carrying books beneath their arms as they hurried toward bright classrooms built from pale stone and cedar beams. Workshops echoed with the steady rhythm of skilled hands shaping wood, steel, and glass into goods that soon became known throughout the Northern Territories for their remarkable quality. Travelers arrived expecting to discover the secret behind Dawnhaven's growing prosperity, only to leave speaking not about its buildings or markets, but about the quiet woman whose decisions seemed guided by equal parts wisdom and compassion. Evelyn Carter never sat upon a throne. She preferred long wooden tables where farmers, craftsmen, teachers, and merchants could speak openly beside one another. Every voice mattered. Every concern received the same patient attention regardless of wealth or family name. She believed leadership was not measured by how many people obeyed, but by how many people felt safe enough to hope again. That belief spread farther than any royal decree ever could. Families who had been pushed aside by distant pacts found new beginnings within Dawnhaven's welcoming gates. Young Omegas who had grown accustomed to being underestimated discovered schools that valued intelligence, creativity, and determination above inherited status. Elderly healers trained apprentices without demanding payment, convinced that knowledge became stronger only when it was shared freely. Every season the city expanded another few miles, not because anyone demanded growth, but because more people wished to belong to something built upon dignity instead of fear. Eleanor Ashbourne often watched from the balcony of the community hall as wagons rolled through the front gates from sunrise until evening. One afternoon, she turned toward Evelyn with a knowing smile. "Do you realize they no longer travel here searching for opportunity?" she asked quietly. Evelyn glanced toward the busy streets below, where children chased one another across the town square, while merchants greeted unfamiliar faces with genuine warmth. "Then why do they come?" she asked. Eleanor's eyes softened. "They come searching for the feeling they believe has disappeared everywhere else." Evelyn remained silent for a long moment. She remembered the cold marble corridors of Blackwood Palace where every conversation had been measured and every smile carefully observed. Here, strangers shared bread before asking one another's names. Here, success belonged to the entire community instead of a chosen few. She understood then that Dawnhaven had become more than a city. It had become an idea. News of that idea traveled farther than anyone expected. Ambassadors requested trade agreements. Scholars sought permission to study its schools. Physicians carried its healing methods into distant villages. Even neighboring alphas quietly adopted policies inspired by stories carried home from the mountain valley. Before long, maps across the continent included a name that had not existed only a few years earlier. Dawnhaven stood proudly beside kingdoms far older than itself, respected not for the size of its army, but for the strength of its people. Each evening, as golden sunlight washed across white stone rooftops, Evelyn walked the same quiet streets without royal guards or ceremonial processions. She greeted shopkeepers by name, paused to listen to children proudly describe their lessons, and thanked builders still finishing tomorrow's homes. She never noticed how many grateful eyes followed her footsteps. To them, she was not merely the founder of a remarkable city. She was living proof that a heart once left behind could become the foundation upon which an entire future was built. Winter arrived earlier than expected across the northern territories, leaving frozen rivers, poor harvests, and anxious councils struggling to prepare for the months ahead. Villages that had once relied upon dependable trade routes suddenly found their storehouses running low, while merchants quietly admitted that only one place still possessed enough grain, medicine, and skilled craftsmen to supply entire regions without emptying its own reserves. Every report delivered to Blackwood Palace carried the same conclusion. Dawnhaven had become the center of commerce no kingdom could afford to ignore. Rowan Blackwood listened as advisors spread maps across the long oak table inside the Royal Council chamber, each marked with shifting trade lines that no longer flowed through Blackwood as they once had. "We can negotiate through intermediaries," one noble suggested. Another slowly shook his head. "They have politely declined every indirect proposal. The Lady of Dawnhaven only signs agreements after meeting those responsible for keeping them." Silence settled over the room. Rowan studied the silver phoenix stamped across the latest treaty, the same symbol that had appeared on every document arriving from beyond the Frostvale Mountains. It represented honesty, fair exchange, and promises honored without exception. Merchants trusted it more than royal seals. Farmers celebrated whenever they saw it. Even rival packs spoke the name of Dawnhaven with unusual respect. Rowan finally rose from his chair and folded the treaty with careful hands. "Then I will meet her myself," he said calmly. 3 days later, a small royal delegation crossed the winding mountain roads beneath clear blue skies. The farther they traveled, the more unexpected the journey became. Instead of abandoned settlements weakened by winter, they discovered thriving farms where families worked together despite the cold. Schools remained open as children hurried through fresh snow carrying books wrapped safely beneath warm coats. Every village welcomed travelers with genuine hospitality rather than cautious suspicion. Rowan noticed something else that none of his advisors had prepared him for. People smiled. Not the practiced smiles offered before royalty, but quiet expressions of contentment that appeared effortless, as though hope had become an ordinary part of daily life. By late afternoon, the white stone walls of Dawnhaven appeared beyond the valley, glowing beneath the pale winter sunlight exactly as the merchants had described. Wide streets stretched neatly between elegant buildings adorned with evergreen garlands and lanterns that would soon illuminate the coming evening. Markets bustled with activity despite the season, while musicians filled the central square with cheerful melodies. There were no frightened faces rushing to impress an alpha king. Life continued naturally around him, confident in itself. Rowan found that strangely unsettling. He was welcomed with courtesy by city officials who escorted him toward the Grand Council Hall overlooking the heart of the city. Massive cedar doors opened slowly, revealing a bright chamber filled with maps, ledgers, and representatives from neighboring territories engaged in thoughtful discussion. At the far end of the room, one woman stood beside a tall window where the fading sunlight surrounded her in warm gold. She turned at the sound of approaching footsteps with composed grace, her ivory skin illuminated by the evening light, her calm blue eyes carrying the quiet confidence of someone who no longer needed anyone else's approval to recognize her own worth. Time itself seemed to hesitate. Rowan stopped without realizing he had done so. The years between them disappeared in a single heartbeat. Evelyn Carter met his stunned expression with nothing more than a gentle, professional smile, as though greeting an honored guest she had never expected to know personally. "Welcome to Dawnhaven, Your Majesty," she said with steady warmth. "I hope your journey through the mountains was comfortable." The meeting that every advisor had expected to become a negotiation unfolded with unexpected calm. Rowan accepted the seat offered across the long walnut table while maps, trade records, and carefully organized reports rested between them. Evelyn spoke with quiet confidence, explaining harvest forecasts, shipping schedules, and supply agreements with neighboring territories. Every decision reflected years of careful planning rather than sudden ambition. She listened before answering, welcomed different opinions without surrendering her own judgment, and thanked every council member who contributed to the discussion. Rowan found himself watching not only what she said, but how the people around her responded. They did not lower their heads because they feared her authority. They trusted her because she had earned it. That realization settled heavily upon him. During a brief pause in the meeting, his eyes wandered toward the tall windows overlooking the city below. Children crossed the square carrying baskets of fresh bread toward an elderly shelter. Apprentices hurried into workshops where experienced craftsmen greeted them with patient smiles. Physicians welcomed travelers into a bright clinic without asking for payment before treatment. Nothing about Dawnhaven resembled the kingdom he had imagined. Prosperity here had not been built upon conquest or privilege. It had been built one ordinary act of kindness at a time. "You have created something extraordinary," Rowan admitted quietly before he could stop himself. Evelyn followed his gaze toward the bustling streets below. "No," she answered with a gentle smile. "Many people created it together. I simply believe they deserve the chance." Her words carried no pride and no hidden accusation. They were spoken as simple truth. That honesty made them impossible to ignore. As the afternoon continued, Rowan noticed familiar qualities that had once quietly surrounded his own life without his appreciation. The way she remembered the names of every advisor entering the room. The way she paused whenever someone seemed uncertain, encouraging them to finish their thoughts instead of rushing ahead. The way she thanked the attendants who served tea with the same respect she offered foreign ambassadors. None of those habits had changed. Only the world around her had finally learned to recognize their value. Later, Eleanor Ashbourne joined the council and warmly greeted Rowan before sharing several reports regarding regional trade. The elderly matriarch spoke openly about the early years of Dawnhaven, describing difficult winters, failed harvests, and long nights when every family worked together simply to protect the valley's future. She praised countless citizens for their dedication, yet whenever she mentioned Evelyn, her voice carried unmistakable affection. She arrived believing she had lost everything. Eleanor said softly while reviewing the final ledger. What none of us realized was that she had brought the one thing this valley had been missing. Rowan looked toward Evelyn with quiet curiosity. Eleanor smiled. Someone who believed every person deserved another beginning. Those words lingered long after the meeting concluded. As evening settled across Dawnhaven, lanterns illuminated the streets with warm golden light, while music drifted gently through the winter air. Standing alone beside the council hall balcony, Rowan watched families laughing together below and understood a truth he had never allowed himself to see. The woman he once believed had quietly disappeared had not been rescued by fate. She had rescued herself. And in doing so, she had created a future where countless others no longer needed to wait for someone powerful to decide whether they mattered. Rowan returned to Blackwood Palace carrying signed agreements that promised relief for his kingdom, yet the documents resting inside his leather case felt lighter than the questions weighing upon his mind. Every mile separating him from Dawnhaven seemed only to sharpen the memories he had tried to bury for years. He remembered quiet mornings when Evelyn had already arranged council reports before anyone else arrived. He remembered festivals where she had slipped away from noble celebrations to spend time with orphaned children instead. He remembered countless moments that had once seemed ordinary simply because he had believed they would always remain part of his life. Now each memory returned carrying a different meaning. Within days of his return, Rowan ordered the royal archives opened. Dust-covered ledgers, council minutes, ceremonial records, and correspondence from 5 years earlier were carefully brought before him. He was not searching for a single answer. He was searching for the truth hidden beneath assumptions he had never questioned. The deeper he looked, the more unsettling the pattern became. Several reports praising Evelyn's charitable work had quietly disappeared from official records before the choosing ceremony. Recommendations submitted by respected elders supporting her future as Luna had never reached his private council. Invitations she was supposed to receive for important diplomatic gatherings had somehow been redirected or canceled without explanation. None of the discoveries appeared dramatic on their own, yet together they formed a picture impossible to ignore. Someone had been quietly shaping what Rowan saw long before he believed he had made his own decision. He requested private meetings with several retired advisors who no longer held positions at court. Most hesitated at first, exchanging uneasy glances before finally speaking with careful honesty. One elderly council member lowered his voice almost to a whisper. "Your Majesty, there were many of us who believed Miss Carter was the wisest choice. But during those final months, Lady Victoria became very influential among several noble families. Rumors spread quickly. Doubts followed. Too few people questioned where those stories began." Rowan listened without interruption, each sentence tightening the silence surrounding him. He thought back to conversations he had dismissed, warnings he had overlooked, and opportunities to ask Evelyn what she truly felt instead of accepting what others claimed on her behalf. The painful truth slowly emerged. No one had forced his decision. The choice had been his alone. Yet he had allowed pride, appearances, and carefully planted assumptions to speak louder than the quiet character of the woman who had never once tried to manipulate his judgment. That realization could not be blamed upon anyone else. Later that evening, Rowan wandered alone through the palace gardens where winter branches stretched across the moonlit sky. The stone bench overlooking the reflecting pond remained exactly where it had always been. Evelyn had often sat there after long council meetings, feeding small birds that gathered without fear around her feet. The garden looked unchanged, but for the first time Rowan understood that places did not lose their warmth because seasons changed. They lost it when the people who quietly filled them with kindness were no longer there. He closed his eyes and heard Eleanor Ashbourne's gentle words once again. Someone who believed every person deserved another beginning. The sentence echoed through the still night until another thought followed close behind. Evelyn had given strangers the second chances that he himself had failed to offer her. Standing beneath the silent stars, Rowan realized that the greatest loss he had suffered was never the partnership of a future Luna. It was the quiet privilege of walking beside a woman whose true worth he had only recognized after the entire world had already begun to follow her light. Spring arrived with unexpected storms that swept across the northern territories, washing out bridges, delaying caravans, and leaving dozens of remote villages struggling to receive food and medical supplies. Messengers traveled day and night carrying urgent requests for assistance, and before long both Blackwood Kingdom and Dawnhaven found themselves coordinating relief efforts across the same mountain roads. What began as separate missions gradually became a shared responsibility, proving that compassion often traveled faster than pride. Rowan chose to accompany several supply caravans himself, not because protocol required it, but because he wanted to understand the people whose lives depended upon decisions made inside distant council chambers. Along the winding roads, he watched Dawnhaven volunteers greet every traveler with equal kindness regardless of which banner they carried. They asked no questions about allegiance before offering blankets, warm meals, or shelter. Every action reflected the values Evelyn had spent years nurturing. When the final convoy reached Dawnhaven, Rowan was invited once again to the council hall where leaders from neighboring territories had gathered to organize long-term recovery plans. Evelyn welcomed each representative with the same calm professionalism she had shown during their first meeting. She listened carefully to every concern, adjusted routes to protect isolated communities, and encouraged neighboring packs to cooperate instead of competing for limited resources. By the end of the session, agreements had been reached without raised voices or wounded pride. As the council dispersed, Rowan remained behind while evening sunlight filtered through the tall windows overlooking the city. For several quiet moments, neither of them spoke. The silence felt different now. It no longer carried surprise. It carried the weight of everything left unsaid across the years. Rowan finally broke the silence. "I spent a long time believing that success belonged to those who held the most power," he said softly. "Now I see that real strength belongs to those who help others discover their own." Evelyn looked toward the streets below, where children chased one another through blooming gardens, while merchants closed their shops for the evening. A peaceful smile touched her face. "Power can protect people," she replied, "but only character can inspire them." Rowan lowered his eyes, choosing his next words carefully. "I owe you more than an apology. Evelyn turned back toward him with the same composed expression she had carried since his arrival. There was no anger waiting behind her eyes, only quiet understanding shaped by years of growth. "You do not owe me the past," she answered gently. "The past cannot be repaid. It can only be learned from." Her response surprised him more than any accusation ever could. She had released the bitterness long ago, while he had continued carrying it without realizing its weight. Rowan nodded slowly, accepting the truth instead of arguing against it. He understood that forgiveness could never be requested like a favor or earned through a single conversation. Trust was built the same way Dawnhaven itself had been built, one honest decision at a time. As twilight settled across the valley, they stepped onto the balcony overlooking streets alive with music, laughter, and lantern light. Rowan noticed that every person below greeted Evelyn with genuine affection rather than obligation. She belonged to them, and they belonged to one another. In that quiet moment, he finally understood what he had truly lost years earlier. It had never been the possibility of sharing a throne. It had been the opportunity to stand beside a woman whose greatest achievement was not building a remarkable city, but creating a place where every person who entered its gates believed their future could still become brighter than their past. The first rays of summer sunlight spread across Dawnhaven as representatives from every neighboring territory gathered beneath white stone arches to celebrate a new alliance founded not upon conquest, but upon cooperation. Farmers stood beside scholars, merchants beside healers, and leaders beside ordinary families whose lives had been transformed by the simple belief that every person deserved the chance to build a better tomorrow. Rowan Blackwood arrived without the grand procession that had once accompanied every royal appearance. He walked through the city with quiet appreciation, stopping often to greet the people who now welcomed him not because of his title, but because they had witnessed his willingness to listen, learn, and change. The years had taught him that respect could never be commanded. It had to be earned one choice at a time. Inside the council hall, Evelyn Carter addressed the gathering with the same calm confidence that had guided Dawnhaven from a forgotten valley into a beacon for the entire Northern Territories. She spoke about shared harvests, stronger schools, safer trade routes, and the responsibility every leader carried to leave the next generation with more hope than fear. Her words were simple, yet they reached every heart because they reflected the life she had already lived. When the meeting concluded, Rowan asked if they might walk together once more before he returned home. Evelyn agreed, and they followed a quiet path leading toward the hill where Eleanor Ashbourne had once encouraged a lonely young woman to imagine something greater than survival. Wildflowers danced gently in the warm breeze, and below them the city shimmered with laughter, music, and countless ordinary moments that together formed an extraordinary life. Rowan looked across the valley before finally speaking. "Years ago, I believed destiny was something that happened to us," he said quietly. "Now I believe destiny is shaped by the choices we make after everything falls apart." Evelyn smiled gently as she watched children racing through the meadows below. "The moon goddess may open a door," she replied, "but we decide whether we walk through it with pride, kindness, or fear." Rowan nodded, accepting the wisdom in her words. He no longer asked her to return to Blackwood Palace. He no longer asked her to become the woman she had once been. Instead, he offered something far more honest. "Whether our paths remain side by side or simply continue toward the same future, I hope to become the kind of leader who deserves the trust of the people I serve." Evelyn met his eyes, seeing neither the proud Alpha King from years before nor the regret that had once burdened his heart. She saw a man who had finally chosen humility over certainty and growth over pride. "Then keep walking that path," she said warmly, "because every good kingdom begins with one good decision, followed by another." As the evening sun settled behind the mountains, its golden light washed across Dawnhaven until the city seemed to glow like a promise fulfilled. Rowan descended the hill carrying no expectation except the determination to lead with greater compassion than he had yesterday. Evelyn remained overlooking the valley she had built, knowing she no longer needed anyone's approval to measure her worth. She had transformed rejection into purpose, loneliness into community, and quiet resilience into a legacy that would outlive every crown. Long after history remembered the names of kings and queens, people would continue telling the story of the woman who proved that the brightest future is never given by destiny alone. It is built with courage, kindness, and the unwavering belief that every ending can become the beginning of something even greater.